Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, a podcast by me, Mark Duquesne. You know, comedy is hugely subjective. I've seen around 1,000 comedians over the last 40 odd years, and yet you could tell me something or someone is or isn't funny, and I could tell you something or someone is or isn't funny, and who can say who would be right? Me, it would be me. I love talking to people in comedy about comedy, and if you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review or share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is an award-winning sketch and character comedian taking her debut hour to this year's Edinburgh Fringe. When so many comedians are trying to make a statement, her abstract and absurdist humour is a joy. She just wants to be funny. She just wants to be silly. And is. His character comedian, Kathy Maniura.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
If you're happy, then we can just crack straight on.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, what are your earliest recollections of comedy? How did it begin for you?
I was thinking about this the other day, and actually, my family is quite musical and like like amateur musicians. So my parents met in an amateur orchestra in their late 20s. So most of my introduction to comedy was musical comedy really early on. Yeah, and like old school musical comedy, so like Flanders and Swan.
Ooh, wow.
I don't know if you've ever come across them. Yeah. And it's funny because then I started watching a lot of sketch, and Armstrong and Miller have that like parody of Flanders and Swan, which for me was like really funny. But yeah, Flanders and Swan, and then like Tom Lehrer, who's kind of like feels a bit like the American counterpart. But just I was really drawn to those just like very silly, clever songs. Yeah. And I remember like learning them for like school talent contests and stuff. And I actually did do a very dramatic rendition of We Three Kings for a talent contest at school when I was like 10. I kind of always had this like, I've always enjoyed making people laugh, and I've always done kind of silly little performances. And then, yeah, as I say, started watching a lot of sketch. And I feel like there was just so much sketch on TV in the kind of early 2000s, mid 2000s. So, yeah, the Catherine Tate Show, Mitchell and Webb, Armstrong and Miller. The Mighty Boosh was huge for me in terms of being like, oh, you can kind of do anything. You can build any kind of absurd world. And it was so uniquely them, I suppose. And I think that absurdity has absolutely coloured the stuff that I do. And then when I started, I guess, engaging with live comedy. So I did a lot of theatre in my teens, but was always being cast in comedy parts. Right. And eventually someone was like, do you want to just cut out the middleman and just do comedy? And I was like, oh, yeah. Then I don't have to do any of the boring acting. So got into sketch comedy at uni and kind of went from there and met my comedy partner, Derek. Yep. We were in a duo called Horseplay. We still work together. And just sort of like never stopped doing it. I think a lot of people get into it at uni and then maybe stop when they leave, but we just didn't. And then, started going up to the Edinburgh Fringe, and that was where I saw people like Lolly Adefope and Emma Siddy, and again, just realising that character comedy was a thing, right? Which I don't think is. I mean, obviously, somebody like Catherine Tate is. Those are really character-driven sketches, but I suppose I wasn't thinking of it like that. And seeing people do these shows that was just them being silly and being all these different characters for an hour, and especially women, you know, like seeing women just be really stupid. It's like a magical thing. And yeah, that there you go. That's the journey through my comedy education. And actually, the one thing I didn't mention is YouTube. Right. I was big into YouTube in my kind of tween years, I guess. And there were people on there like Community Channel and like accounts like College Humor that were doing a lot of sketch stuff online, and a lot of, it's funny now because everyone's doing it, but like at the time, Community Channel, she's Australian, Natalie Tran, and she would like edit herself next to herself so she could do sketches together, which in like 2008 was like the most mind-boggling, incredible thing ever. Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about sketch comedy, but what about sketch comedy, and what more particularly about the abstract and the absurd drew you specifically to that style of comedy?
I mean, I suppose coming from theatre, it feels like maybe the smallest sidestep. You're still playing characters, you're still like kind of performing off other people. I think that was the thing that I didn't necessarily know that I would become a solo performer when I started that, because I really enjoy that, like, riffing off people basically, and working with people. And I think initially I came to comedy completely as a performer, not as a writer. So I suppose again in sketch there's that collaborative sense of like everyone's bringing ideas, and it's the perfect environment to like learn how to write.
Right.
And I really did like learn by doing, and was very very like unsure of my ability to write for quite a long time actually. And then I suppose out of that, found character and found a version of solo performance that felt like it suited me. And then the funny thing is that now there are definitely elements of more traditional stand-up coming through. Like in my show, I pretend to be lots of different objects, but in between I am myself. I do kind of come out of character.
Yeah.
And that was something I never thought I'd do, but it's just sort of emerged quite naturally. And in a weird kind of way, I find that like the hardest and scariest part, being myself on stage, which I think a lot of character comedians say.
We've touched on a few things there that I'm interested in talking about. I mean, the first thing I want to know is coming from this dramatic side, and then this sidestep into being a solo. You don't have that team, that support anymore. So what's that like, stepping out on stage for the first time as a solo act?
Very scary. I do remember the first solo gig I did, which went well, but I remember being terrified because, again, I think there's a certain protection maybe being with somebody else, or at least I think, it's very unsurprisingly very kind of like exposing doing it yourself, because it's all on you, whether it's good, whether it's bad. There's kind of nothing to hide behind. Whereas I think all performers have kind of insecurities, and my sketch partner Derek, I just think is like one of the most brilliant writer performers in the world. So it's quite easy to step out on stage with him, because I'm just happy to be here. Like, you're amazing. I completely trust you, and it's easier to not get so in your head. Whereas, doing it by yourself, you're like, I'm on my own here. Like, if this doesn't go well, that's on me, and I have to kind of handle that myself. And it was interesting. So I started doing solo gigs in 2019, and this is, of course, my first hour-long solo show. And I was flyering solo for the first time for Brighton Fringe this year, and I felt all the same insecurities come back up. Where when I was telling people to come, I found it much harder to promote the show, because I was like, it's just me. I just have to tell you I'm good. Yeah. You know what I mean? Whereas I can't be like, oh, this thing I've made with these people is great. Like, it's, and I wasn't expecting that. Really wasn't expecting it. So
it's no longer an ensemble. It's not the show. It's you yourself.
Yeah. And I think you know, the nice thing about performing with other people is it is a fully shared experience. So when it goes well, you've kind of had that together, and you ride that wave. And when it goes badly, you can kind of be like, God, that was awful. And you both kind of felt it in the same way. But that said, obviously, like a solo show is never really a solo show. I mean, Derek has been like so helpful in this, and I think will always be a collaborator. And I've had a couple of, like, Alison Thea Scott gave me some notes on the show, and Kat Bond, who are both brilliant. And then just, you know, that's the lovely thing about gigging and being in a comedy community, is that, you know, several nights a week I'm bumping into people, and people are going, how's the show? And I'm like, I don't know about this bit. And someone goes, have you thought about this? And so there's kind of, it feels like it's been written by like so many people, which is lovely, which is really nice.
Yeah. I always ask people about how much of them we're truly seeing on stage. And of course, it's interesting with yourself, because you just mentioned about one moment you're in character, and then the next moment you're being yourself. But obviously as a character comic, you're always being other and not yourself. So when you have to then play you, are you a character?
This is a great question, and this is something I'm trying to work out as well. I think so. The version of me in the show, it sort of emerged quite naturally because the characters are quite relatively heightened and absurd. And so what I naturally started doing is kind of coming out of character and being quite maybe like chill is the right word. It's not like low energy or deadpan, but I'll kind of just be like, okay, that was me as a scooter, like just quite matter of fact maybe. And I sort of, it happened naturally because to me it does feel like that. I'm like, okay, that was that, here's another one. But then I started finding that people find that quite funny. The fact that I'm being so like blasé about this really strange stuff that I'm doing. And I think it helps like ground it a bit if people aren't quite, because a lot of people aren't used to watching that kind of comedy. And I think having me be quite normal, it helps them to be like, okay, she's not this kind of completely mad, you know, which is obviously fine, but I think it helps people to get on board with it. But how much is it me? I think it is. I don't feel like I'm consciously trying to act a version of myself, but I suppose there's naturally a filter. But I mean, the other way of looking at it is that in a sense, the characters are also all parts of me. Or not parts of me, but, you know, they're all from my brain. I think in a sense, you probably learn more about me watching me do all these weird things, like really learn about me than if I was like talking about my life for an hour, I think. I'm still working that out though.
Well, it's again. Let's get to the point of it. Your show Objectified and is basically you portraying everyday objects.
Yes.
When I saw you recently perform, and when you came out on stage and we were performing, I was like, okay, what's happening?
Yeah.
What's this now?
Yeah.
and then you sort of went, well, and that's me as a straw.
Yeah.
I went, yeah, okay, now I'm with you now. Now I'm on board. But because there wasn't like a setup or an introduction. It was just you playing a role, but I had no idea initially what was going on. That's interesting. Now you breaking out and going, yeah, and that was that.
Yeah,
and now this.
And I've kind of worked that out over the years because I did used to sort of set it up, come out and be like, I'm going to do some characters.
Right.
But I think I enjoy the sort of mild confusion.
Yes.
Because I always come out in character now, but the characters are all at most like 2 minutes long, so it's never it's never too long, but it's kind of long enough that you feel an audience. It's funny because sometimes there'll be people who straight away are like, yeah, I get it, I'm on board. And there are people who you can feel be like, ooh, I don't quite know what's happening. And this kind of nervousness that maybe I will just do that for 10 minutes, which I weirdly quite enjoy because I like being able to puncture that and be like, don't worry, everyone. I know it's weird.
Yeah, but I loved it because it's that kind of, it's the slow reveal, isn't it? It's sort of saying, oh, okay, I don't really understand what's just happened. And then you go, oh, and then you sort of, you turn it around and say, well, that's that because of this. And you go, oh, yeah, of course. And then the whole thing slots into place.
I think that's, it's also it's the show don't tell, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to pretend to be objects. This is what I mean by that. Like, it's actually, as I'm sure I'll do in a moment, quite hard. People understand the idea, but don't actually know what that means in practice. Like they're like, sometimes people are like, you pose as objects, or you dress up as, you know. So I think doing it and being like, I'm kind of like personifying this object from the off, and then it just gives people an example straight away, I guess.
Yeah, but there's a world of difference between someone coming to see your show, which is a show about you portraying objects, and going to see a mixed bill, and then you walk out on stage and go, here's something you haven't seen today.
Yeah, and I must say, you know, mixed reception. I think it really depends on, well, I don't know, again, I haven't quite worked this out, but you know, it would depend on the bill. Like if I'm the only person not doing kind of more standard stand-up, that can be hard work because people, if they've seen 10 stand-ups and I come out on stage, are just truly not in the right headspace for it. And sort of for that reason, I haven't quite drawn the line under it yet, but I'm starting to do like less in clubs, like clubby clubs. I just don't think those audiences are after that. And by the time you've won them over, you're kind of done. But that said, like there are some gigs, it's just so hard to predict, and that's kind of what I enjoy about it. Is sometimes an audience seemingly out of nowhere just get it and just go with it. What I often find as well is that like I love doing queer gigs, and this is like a really general statement, but I think within like queer spaces and within the queer community, there's a sense of like, it's almost like queer in like the standard definition of the word, right? There's this kind of like playfulness and this like, there's, you know, the kind of whole drag tradition is essentially a type of character comedy, or at least can be, and cabaret and all of this. Like I find that those audiences are just like, yeah, cool, yeah, absolutely, we get it. So those are like just a joy to do, and obviously alternative nights and cabaret nights.
Right.
But it's fun seeing how it plays to different people, absolutely. And it's fun being like, can I take you with me?
Yeah.
You think maybe you're resistant, but and I tend to then maybe at those gigs do a bit more of the bits as me.
Right.
To help people be like, come on.
Is that more of a, I don't know, when you talk to sort of stand-up comics and they talk about, well, you know, you can die on stage or you can smash the night, and there's kind of, there's very little sort of in between, but you've sort of hit upon another possibility where it's not just sort of they get it or they don't get it. It's more about you bringing them with you. It's more about them, you can converting them to your way of thinking, kind of.
Yeah. I think stand-ups often have that as well. You know, you maybe have different bits of material in your back pocket, and if a crowd are really not on board with something, you're like, oh, okay, how about this thing that I know normally works, or whatever. I also think that comes with experience, and that's something that's actually quite, I would say within the last 6 months, I've started to be able to do, whereas it very much used to be, here's my set. Either it's going to go well, or you're not going to want it and it's going to be horrible. But getting to a point where I can be like, okay, here's my set, but if I can feel you're not quite with me, here's maybe something else I could do.
Right.
Here's maybe maybe it's a little bit more audience interaction. Maybe it's slowing it down. Sometimes if an audience is really struggling and in my first character and I haven't finished it yet, I will sort of half break. Like in the character, I'll be like, I'm pretending to be a straw, and is everyone okay with that? Like, you know, just that acknowledging that that hesitation.
Yeah.
So that actually feels quite. Obviously, the best gigs are still the ones where you just like smash it and it's great, but it makes me, it's a satisfying feeling to be like, I think I can deal with the different responses, and I think there are gigs that I've done which maybe a couple of years ago I would have absolutely died, where now I've come off stage and been like, okay, they didn't love me, but I think they enjoyed it, and I think they got it, and I think I was able to adapt to that, which feels good. It makes me feel like a real comedian.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, my second point about your on-stage characterizations, is when you're doing the characters, are you playing them dramatically as well as comedically? Are you doing your acting side?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. Yeah, I actually think they do better when I do.
Right.
And it is that thing of just people, I think audiences can like smell doubt or hesitation, or if you are just completely committed to a character bit, it's that thing of like taking something silly very seriously.
Yeah. Yes.
And like allowing for silence, the most terrifying thing of all. And I think my performance is better when I do actually kind of sounds very dramatic, but like get a bit lost in it. Like I'm really like thinking as this thing.
Yes.
But for comedic effect, you know, like I'm not interested in really communicating anything that's not ultimately funny. You know, like I don't, wherever characters are serious, that's the joke.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think I am acting them a bit, but I'm sort of hesitant. Maybe I've just got baggage from my theatre days of sounding too kind of like thespy, but I think it is just like committing to the bit, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, another way of looking at it is it struck me as almost like doing observational comedy, but from an entirely alternative perspective.
That's the secret.
Sorry.
That's the secret
It's out of the bag.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because sometimes people are like, wow, your stuff is so inventive. And I'm like, well, kind of if you look at the observations I'm making on paper, they're quite like straightforward. Like the paper straw, it's like, yeah, paper straws are ridiculous. Like that bit as a stand-up routine would be like, aren't paper straws crazy? Like there were so many things we could do to save the environment and we just decided to replace every straw.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous and they're really annoying and they don't even work properly. They get really floppy, right? Like that's that bit. And it's like, okay, pretty standard observation. But then my hack is if then I say that from the perspective of the straw, people are like, what? It's like I have an electric scooter as well, and it's like, yeah, electric scooters are everywhere. They're just all just like sad leaning up against buildings in the street, and no one ever unlocks them, and they're so annoying and they're so dangerous. Again, not really groundbreaking observation, but then when a scooter says it. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about competitions. So Sketch Off 2020 and One to Watch, Funny Women One to Watch 2020. You won those and you finalist in 2021, so you think you're funny. How do you feel about competitions?
I think they're helpful. I think it's, and I try to not think of them as any kind of like a genuine indicator of your like worth. I think that's the thing that's really hard about them.
Yeah.
I think if you do well, it's a nice reassurance that you're not like wasting your time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are better than all the other people who entered, because there's so much more that plays into it. But I think they're just like practically very helpful. And most of the big opportunities I've got, and like, So You Think You're Funny was how my agent saw me, you know, before she was my agent. Like people, a lot of people watch them, a lot of industry watch them. And to me, the thing because I've been in a few finals and it sounds strange, but like the final is the useful bit. Like actually then whether or not you win is kind of by the by, but like having that platform and that opportunity to gig to more people than you've probably ever gigged to before, to be seen by people that might not otherwise see you, and to meet other acts as well. Like that's the lovely thing about something like Sketch Off, where it is kind of a niche, I guess, is that through doing that, through the heats and the semi-finals and the final, I met so many other like sketch and character comedians, and then there's this kind of camaraderie, like when you see each other at gigs, you're like, oh. And I recently was in the final of a drag king competition as well, which was so much fun. And that as well, that's a very small community, and just being in that environment and like seeing. That's the other thing, because often you do it quite early career, so like just seeing what other people are doing, and seeing them do it like really well, and being like, oh wow, like I find it that they can be, if you let them be, I think quite like energizing, exciting experiences. But obviously there is an element of like, it's bizarre because you're doing a gig but somebody is declared the best at the gig, which is a strange thing to know going into it.
But it's only the best in those few people's opinion on that particular place and time out of that particular group of contestants.
Exactly, which you do have to really remember. And that there are other things going on there as well, where there's like considerations about like the industry and like who won it last year, like who, you know, that I don't know. I think there's so much that goes into those decisions, which is not just like the people who win deserve it. I think you never have anyone win or do very well who's not good, but it's just to say that like there are plenty of other very good people who, for reasons unrelated to how good they are, might not have made it.
Yeah. You talk there with a lot of affection about working with other people, about meeting other people and working in sketches. So sketch comedy, solo comedy, or running a night as you do, I think, at the Glory in East London.
Yeah.
Where are you most comfortable? Running a night on your own or in the group?
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's a great question. I think, and maybe this is an annoying answer from me, I think I like having the range. I think doing any one, it kind of all keeps me sane. I think at the moment, I probably am most comfortable with the solo stuff, but that's because that's where I'm putting most of my energy. That's because I have this show I've been working on that I'm really proud of. But that said, I love working with other people. Like Derek and I, we still do spots here and there. Like we're doing one tonight, and we were rehearsing last night, and I was like, this is so fun. Like you're just playing around with someone, basically.
Yeah.
And then the Horsies, the night that we run, I love that as well because it's a character comedy night, which we started because it just felt like there wasn't one. There are alt nights for sure, but like a dedicated character comedy space didn't really exist. So that's been wonderful. And there are like 7 of us loosely who run that, and we're just sort of collecting character comedians that we find, and that's so fun as well, creating a space where audiences are up for it because they've bought into that. And most acts that do the night say that. They're like, oh, it's amazing being on a bill where I'm not the weird one, where it's just that's the vibe, and like the audience are warmed up to it and all of that. So that for creating a sense of community in an industry that can be quite brutal, I think, and quite lonely, and can really, I mean, it's kind of coming back to the competition point, but it's easy to start feeling like you're pitted against each other. And I think just being deliberate about like, no, like I want to create opportunities for you to perform, and then a lot of those people then have their nights and you'll be performing, or being able to like just like encourage people. Like there's a bunch of us going up to Edinburgh this year, and we've like quite organically started like all just like recommending each other on like Twitter threads and things, which like it just, in a sense, maybe we're competitors, but like of course we're not, because people see so many shows, and it's just much nicer to feel like you have a group of peers who are like, come on, do your stuff, and that's kind of reciprocated.
Your show this year at Edinburgh is your debut hour.
Indeed.
But not your first festival experience.
No, I've been up 4 or 5 times now, I think, with sketch groups in various guises. So I sort of know the nature of the beast in a sense, which I'm grateful for, because I think I sort of like don't have any illusions about it and what it is. And I sort of know how to navigate it, but it's always a bit, it's tricky. It's a tricky environment to be in. But I am very curious how it will feel doing it by myself. And again, trying to be careful about making sure I am not by myself, and that I am making a concerted effort to spend time with friends. And I mean, I'm living with Lorna Rose Treen and a couple of clowns who are doing a show called Trolls, Norwegian clowns, which just is the most I don't know what that flat's going to be like, and I can't wait. I think it's going to be so fringy. So that's nice, just like knowing they'll be around, but trying to make a concerted effort to spend time with people, and to because that is the nice thing doing it with someone, is you literally have someone sharing that whole thing with you. You don't have to like explain anything to them, because they're almost certainly feeling exactly the same way, because they're experiencing all the same things. So Yeah, we'll see.
So do you watch other comics? Do you watch comedy? Is it still entertaining you, or are you just so now deep inside it that
Yeah.
you're jaded by it?
I do, and I think that's one of the amazing things about the Fringe is like everyone's there.
Mm.
Like most of the best comedians in the country, but increasingly like in the world,
Yeah.
certainly like the English speaking world are there. And yeah, I interestingly last year when I first went up, I was seeing like several shows a day. I just loved it.
Mm.
I think now, and that's part of learning how to do it in a way that's sustainable. I think last year I was seeing maybe like a show a day or every other day, which still over a month is a lot. But you know, knowing, yeah, you kind of have to protect your energy, and again, it can sometimes there's like mixed emotions watching a show, right? Because sometimes if a show is brilliant, but it's kind of in the ballpark of what you do, you're like, oh my god, why didn't I think of that? I'm not that good. Or this maybe is going to sound really kind of shady. Sometimes you go and see a show that has a lot of buzz around it, and you think, oh, it's not that good, and then you get a bit bitter. You know, like this. So there's a lot. It can be quite intense watching other shows sometimes. But that said, like, yeah, the opportunity to see stuff up there. I mean, in particular, there's like some of the American comedians, like alt comedians. So like Meg Stalter will be up there, Paddy Harrison, who I love, and watch all their stuff online. And just like the fact that they're going to be there and I can see their shows is like, oh, I've seen them both before, but they're wonderful. So yeah, stuff like that. And then it's easy because then you're like, I'm in a different world to you. So you don't have to think about any of the complicated, the complicated feelings. It's just super fun. But also obviously just supporting other comedians as well and friends and seeing them do well. Yeah.
Do you set targets for yourself, particularly in Edinburgh? Perhaps do you think, well, I want to get a 5-star review, or I want to get, win an award or something?
Yeah.
Or more generally, do you think, in 3 years' time, I want to play this venue or something like that? Do you have those kinds of objectives?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I'm a real planner, and I do every New Year. I do like a year in review session, and I sit down and this is not just like professionally, this is just like my whole life. I'll like think about what's happened in a year, and I also kind of set goals, but not like they're more focuses, I'd say. Like I think I'm hesitant to set very specific goals because then you can very much not achieve it. And I think, especially with Edinburgh, so much is outside your control. Like, of course, honestly, I would love like hundreds of 5-star reviews and an award. Of course, everyone wants that. But again, like, that's not just about the quality of your show. That's about luck, about who sees it, about how many journalists there are there, about who else is up and how they're doing. You know, it's I this year I'm trying to be quite strict with myself of not having goals like that because they're not in my control.
Right.
Kind of my goal is to like get through it with my mental and physical health somewhat intact, and to like find things in the show that I didn't know were there, and like by the end of that's the real opportunity I think of Edinburgh is being able to do a show every day for that long.
Yeah.
Like you just, one day you'll say something in a certain way and you'll be like, oh, that's way funny. And that sometimes only happens when you've done it like 10 times and you know it inside out and you can kind of play with that sort of thing and responding to different audiences. I think kind of my main goal is to just like come out of it a better comedian and a better performer, and and also have like met people and had like made connections and seen stuff that inspires me, and like it's kind of just trying to keep it. I know they say goals should be measurable, but I find for my sanity, like having areas of focus and things that are within my control is I find a way of being a bit kinder to myself, of just being like, this experience is unpredictable. And you know, I don't know where the opportunities will come from. But learning to just be flexible. I think that might also be like a post-pandemic thing, and I had this near-death experience in 2021, which kind of loosely features in the show. But I got really bad tonsillitis and nearly died from tonsillitis, which is ridiculous. So I think that, you know, like when something like that kind of just happens out of nowhere, but I think we all had that with the pandemic. You're like, well, you can have goals up to a point, can't you? And then you just have to be like, okay, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
What can I do next? And not beat yourself up too much, I guess.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
You said something in there that I just want to pick up on about sort of rediscovering your own material. Kind of, you do it over and over again, and then suddenly you notice something in it that you hadn't noticed before. Do you find yourself constantly rediscovering and reevaluating things that you'd prepared that you didn't even realize you'd?
Yeah, and I think I'm actually only thinking about it now. Maybe that's a leftover thing from theatre. But to me, there's the two very distinct phases. I mean, obviously they overlap, but there's the writing, there's the coming up with the ideas and writing it. But then once it's written, I tend to not actually change the written material that much.
Right.
But that's where the fun bit is to me. And I think that's the actorly thing of, you know, if you're doing a theatrical run,
right,
you're trying to find different things every night. You're trying to, that's part of it. You're not replicating the same performance. You're, you know, trying to keep it interesting. And I think that's what I love about Edinburgh is having the chance to do that with different audiences. And I think comedy, that happens even more because the audience response is so obvious. You know, with theatre, it's harder to know what people are thinking. But yeah, people are laughing or they're not laughing, and you can hear the type of laugh they're doing, and you can hear if they're nervous or if they're confused, or if there's one person laughing but somebody else is, you know, like it's so fun playing to that.
Yeah.
And then with me, it's only when I know the material really, really, really well that I can like fully sit in it and start playing more, maybe with like physicality or like tone of voice or pauses.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's an accident and sometimes it's on purpose, but that is the really exciting bit where you find something you didn't even know that you'd written in there.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, if I literally just wait half a second before I say this word, it's a whole other joke.
Yeah.
Which is so fun. Yeah.
You also mentioned the pandemic, as every comic must, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So what was your experience like with no comedy?
I mean, yeah, not good. I think I started doing solo material in like late 2019, so just perfectly timed, really. And yeah, my sketch off win was on the Sunday before lockdown, which was the atmosphere in the theatre was really strange. It was that bit where everyone was like, ooh, something's gonna happen. Yeah. It was funny. One of my friends was like, well, I suppose like you're just the winner of comedy now until it opens up again. I was like, I guess I am. But yeah, I think it was frustrating feeling like I was kind of just getting into my stride with that and just starting to find what my kind of solo voice was. But yeah, I started making videos, which was fun and is something that I still do, and it was nice to kind of have the time to do that. And Derek and I were working towards our last Edinburgh show, which is called Bareback, and actually the pandemic, he was locked down in Amsterdam and I was in London, and I think we were both furloughed. So we basically like ripped that script apart and put it back together, like rewrote it almost completely in a way that I'm sure we wouldn't have had time or energy to do otherwise. And I think that show was much better as a result. So yeah, like I don't think it's whatever it's a groundbreaking take. Like there were things that were useful about it, and having that space to maybe reflect on things a bit. But yeah, I was frustrated not being able to perform for sure.
Yeah.
And doing like some Zoom gigs and just being like, this is bad. Like in that you don't have, you can still perform, and I think the audience can still enjoy it, but you don't get any data back. It's that audience response stuff. You can't feel it digitally, and that's the thing that's interesting to me.
Yeah. So
it was like, I don't really want to like perform for the sake of it. Like I'd rather make a video, right? That's what that is, and put it out like, here's a thing for you to watch. But yeah, trying to like feign live performance over Zoom, I did not like.
Making videos, I mean, videos are hugely popular. Is that something that you anticipated?
I mean, the video, it's hard, isn't it? Because everyone makes videos now, and I find it, again, love, hate, like it's wonderful being able to do that in that way, and it's like a fun medium to play with, because you can play with editing and you can play with green screens and whatever, but it's so like quantifiable. It's so hard to like, my videos do well, but I think it feels to me like the benchmark for what doing well is now is crazy. You know, like I've got loads of friends who are getting like hundreds of thousands of views regularly, millions, some like millions, which is just baffling. I remember like when I put out a video, like one of my first videos, and it got like 1,000 views, I was like, that's amazing. Which now feels like absolutely nothing in this climate where like people are just, consuming so much. So yeah, I enjoy it, but it's hard to, again, not be like, oh, I could always be doing better. Like, why don't I have 1 million people watching my videos? How do I find those people? I need to compare myself to others less. That's one of my... It's hard. It's really hard.
Well, without competitions and awards and comparison, how do you measure success for yourself?
Oh my goodness, what a question. How do I measure success? I mean, I think part of it is what feels good. Like coming away from a gig and being like, oh, okay, that bit that I've been working out really felt like it landed. And sort of what I was saying before, actually, of like being able to adapt to different gigs. And I mean, what I'm about to say, I will 100% jinx myself, but mostly now I come away from gigs and they feel good. And that's not, I don't always feel like I've killed it, but getting to a point where it's like, oh, I think I'm a decent comedian and I can adapt to these different circumstances, rather than in the early days where it feels like completely random and you just have no idea what you're stepping into, and you don't really know how to respond to it. So that kind of, I guess, having more of a sense of what you can do and what your thing is, and doing it. How do I measure success though? It's hard. You're making me, this is making me realize I probably do need to like, it's something of like trying to celebrate the good things, you know, like it's easy to take for granted the things that are going well and fixate on the things that like other people are doing that you want to do or whatever. But and I think actually often it is like feedback from people you respect as well, and other comedians saying they like a bit that you did, or they you know, whatever, like that kind of thing, I think often feels good, and I try and make sure that I do it as well.
Yeah. Do you get that feedback from either from audience members or from other comedians after the show who come up and say this was great or this was not great?
Yeah, I think there is, for the most part, like a culture of that, which is great. That the saying what you like, I think is, and I do really make an effort to do it as well. But just being like, oh, like that joke about whatever, I thought was really great. Feels nice. Because then you have to be careful with like unsolicited like thought about your ending, which you don't want to be doing. But Yeah, no, I think there is a culture of that,
Yeah.
which is nice.
What have been then so far your best and worst experiences in comedy?
Oh my goodness. I can start with worst. Worst is probably easier. Weirdly. I mean, I think when you start out, you just do a lot of horrible gigs.
Mm.
And I'm not gonna like name and shame any, but there's a lot of like truly open mics that
Yes.
frankly are not that well run. That either have no audience or bad MCs or both, or just I just remember being in a lot of kind of rooms early on where often I was the only woman, and there's a lot of material that just feels like old school. Like I think the thing that's once you get to an extent, once you get into the more curated bills and the more kind of pro circuits, I think it is more kind of representative and balanced. And there's also less of an acceptance of that kind of like, my wife is such a bitch or whatever. You know, just some of the stuff I've seen and just like really racist material. Like there was yeah. Sometimes early on you really are seeing some pretty bleak stuff. And just like God, I did an open mic where it was in a pub, and the owner of the pub came up to me afterwards and he said, "Are you a comedian?" And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And he put his arm around me and he said, "Would you like to have a whiskey after the show?" And I was like, "No, thank you." But just like, don't need that.
Yeah.
Thanks. And you know, just weird things like I've had other comedians, and to be clear, not comedians that I've seen since on the circuit, be like, yeah, like often I don't find women that funny, but I thought your set was really good. And you're like, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Wow.
But I will say that really does, that is not representative of how it is more broadly, and also you start to learn what those nights are and what they're not, and you're like, well, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I meet comedians who are starting out and they're talking about gigs they did, I kind of am like, oh God, yeah. I remember that like world of open mics, which can be really nasty, which I'm very, very grateful to be out of. But it was that quite bleak thing where when you're starting out as a woman comedian, you'll meet other women at gigs and people will be like, what gigs do you recommend? And very often it's just like, don't do this one, don't do this one, don't do this one.
Yeah.
And I kind of just like blacklist. That's not a very fun answer to that question, but it's the genuine one. My best gigs, I mean, I think I must say again, like often competition finals are amazing because you've not played to a room that size.
Right.
And had a stage that size, and I think because you're in a final, maybe the audience is predisposed to think you're good. You know what I mean? I think there's a very warm atmosphere often.
Right.
So they can feel kind of, I mean, very surreal, but like amazing. Yeah.
So what so far then have been the most important lessons? What philosophy have you formed?
Wow, my philosophy. What are the most important lessons? I think, I think one of the most important ones, which is especially true of alt stuff, but I think is probably true of any comedian, is it is not possible for everyone to like you.
Yep.
And that is a hard lesson to learn. And I'm still kind of internalizing it, I think, because obviously you desperately want to be like, if I'm good enough, I can win over everyone.
Yeah.
But there will always be some people who either don't get it or just like, it's not for them. They're just like, this is not the type of comedy that I enjoy, and that's fine. And I think it is that tricky thing of trying to find and build your own audience, so that when you are doing your own shows, you know that the people that are there are kind of bought into what you're trying to do, and finding nights where that audience might be, and finding like-minded people. But yeah, it's that is a difficult one, and I think I had that early on, especially with the like more traditional, like clubby kind of stand-up environments, being like, oh, I just really need to crack this. Like this is kind of like this is the way you do stand-up. This is like a badge of honor and all of that. But kind of getting to a point where it's like, maybe that's actually just not where what I do fits really, and maybe those aren't the audiences that I resonate with. So yeah, that is that, and then I suppose linked to that is try to not take it too personally, which I am better at now actually, and I think that is partly just collecting more data. And like once you've done something, like, you know, if you've done 5 sets and 2 of them have gone badly, you're like, oh my god, am I any good? If you've done 200 and then you have a bad one, you're like, okay, no, it's fine. Like, and maybe it was me, but it's because I was tired. It's because I fluffed up the delivery of that bit, rather than being like, I'm terrible at this. Yeah.
We've talked about your upcoming Edinburgh debut quite a lot, but what is it? And let's put it another different way. What do you hope audiences will take away from it?
Oh, yeah. So it's an hour-long character comedy show where I pretend to be an animate object. I mean, the main thing I hope people take away is like laughter and fun. Like it's a pretty silly show. I want people to just like have fun, and it's very like playful and goofy, and that is the main point of it, is to make people laugh. Can you imagine? For a comedy show? But also, and I don't know how much I mean this, but I think to an extent it'd be fun if people do leave it and kind of look at objects in the world around them a little bit differently and start. I have had people say that to me before at gigs, of like, oh, I started thinking about this bowl that I have in my house that I never use, and maybe it's really sad about that, which I think is fun.
Kathy, where can we find out about you and where we can come and see you perform?
I am on Instagram, Kathy MM, Twitter, Kathy AQM. My show's at the Gilded Balloon every day at 4:40, apart from the 14th of August, which is the one day I will sleep. And I'm doing a lot of mixed bills in Edinburgh as well. But yeah, all my other gigs will all be on my Instagram. And I'll be all over the place, hopefully.
And the last question, of course, is, could you please sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I even thought about this before. It's a hard question. That's why it's such a good one. Okay, this is something I've been thinking about recently. I think comedy is partly the skill of noticing funny things and knowing how to share those with other people. Does that make sense? Because I was talking to some other comedians the other day where we were like, does anyone else feel like they don't really write anything? You're just kind of noticing things and then saying them. And then we were like, maybe that's it. And that's what I do in a very, very concentrated way. I'm just like, I literally notice a funny thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there you go. Isn't that funny?
Kathy, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.